The gunshot echoed through the canyon like thunder, sending a flock of startled ravens into the azure Montana sky. Katherine Everett clutched her infant daughter tighter against her back, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she pushed her exhausted body forward. The year was 1878, and she had been running for 3 days straight, sleeping only when little Rose's cries forced her to stop. The rough-hewn shawl that secured the 6-month-old to her back was soaked with sweat, but Katherine dared not slow down. Not when freedom was so close she could almost taste it, bitter and metallic like blood on her tongue. The sound of hooves striking rocky ground grew louder. Katherine knew she couldn't outrun a horse, had known it from the moment she'd fled the ranch, but desperation had made her try anyway. Her legs gave out beneath her, sending her tumbling into a patch of scrub brush. With the last reserves of her strength, she twisted her body to protect Rose from the impact. "You're done running," a deep voice called out from above her. Katherine looked up, squinting against the harsh sunlight that silhouetted the mounted figure. A tall man sat astride a chestnut mare, his broad shoulders outlined by the fading light. His face was shadowed by the wide brim of his hat, but she could feel the weight of his gaze as he studied her. This wasn't Preston or one of his men's small mercy, but that didn't mean he wasn't dangerous. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking from thirst. "We need help." The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing himself to be younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His expression was unreadable as he approached, but his movements were cautious, as if approaching a wounded animal. "My name's Kieran O'Malley," he said, crouching down to her level. "I'm not going to hurt you, madam." His voice carried the faint lilt of Ireland, softening his words. Rose began to fuss, her tiny face screwing up in preparation for a hungry wail. Katherine's arms trembled as she tried to shift the infant around to her front. "Let me help you with that," Kieran offered, reaching out slowly. Katherine flinched away instinctively, clutching Rose tighter. "It's all right," he said, withdrawing his hands and showing his open palms. "I understand. You've got good reason not to trust strangers, but it'll be dark soon and these hills aren't safe at night. There's a creek just over that rise where we can make camp. You can rest, feed your little one. Why would you help us?" Katherine's words were laced with suspicion born of hard experience. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Because my ma would haunt me till the end of my days if I left a woman and child alone in this wilderness." He stood and offered his canteen. "Water." Her throat burned with thirst, but still she hesitated. "It's just water," he said gently. "I've got more on my horse." Necessity overcame caution. Katherine accepted the canteen with shaking hands and drank deeply, then dampened a corner of her dress to wet her baby's lips. Rose suckled eagerly at the moisture. "What's your name?" Kieran asked as he helped her to her feet. Katherine Everett, and this is Rose." "Well, Miss Everett, you look like you've come a long way. Can I offer you a ride to the creek? It's not far, but you seem about ready to collapse." The offer was tempting. Her feet were blistered raw inside her boots and every muscle in her body screamed for relief, but Katherine shook her head. "I'll walk. But thank you." Kieran nodded, respecting her decision. He gathered the reins of his horse and fell into step beside her, matching his long strides to her faltering pace. "I'll stay close in case you need support." The late afternoon sun painted the Montana landscape in hues of gold and amber as they made their way over the rise. True to Kieran's word, a small creek cut through a sheltered hollow below, its banks lined with cottonwoods that rustled in the gentle breeze. "It's not much," he said, "but it'll do for tonight." Katherine said nothing as they descended toward the water. Her legs nearly gave out again on the final slope, and Kieran's strong hand caught her elbow, steadying her. The simple human contact given without expectation or demand nearly broke her composure. How long had it been since anyone had touched her with kindness? At the creekside, Kieran efficiently set up a small camp. He unsaddled his horse, built a fire, and arranged a bedroll for Katherine near the warmth of the flames, all without intruding on the space she kept around herself and Rose. "I've got some jerky and hardtack," he offered, rummaging in his saddlebags. "Not exactly a feast, but it'll fill your belly." Katherine had settled on the bedroll, finally freeing Rose from the shawl that bound them together. The infant blinked up at the darkening sky, her eyes wide with wonder at the first stars appearing overhead. "Thank you," Katherine said quietly, accepting a piece of jerky. She tore off a small piece and chewed it thoroughly before swallowing, her body remembering hunger even as her mind was distracted by fear. "We won't burden you long, just for the night." Kieran sat across the fire, the dancing flames illuminating his weathered face. "Where are you heading?" "North, to Helena. I have a cousin there," he nodded, not pressing further. "That's a hard journey alone, especially with a little one. We'll manage." Kieran's gaze lingered on the dark bruises that circled her wrists like macabre bracelets, but he said nothing about them. "I'm heading to Bozeman myself. It's in the same direction. I could escort you part of the way." Katherine's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Why would you do that? Like I said, my ma raised me better than to leave a woman and child to fend for themselves in this country." He poked at the fire with a stick. "Besides, I could use the company. Gets lonely out here." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the gentle murmur of the creek. Rose began to fuss again, and Katherine turned away to nurse her, using the moment to collect her thoughts. "You're running from someone," Kieran said finally, his voice matter of fact. "I won't ask who or why, that's your business, but whoever it is, they're likely to be following your trail. You'll stand a better chance with me than alone." Katherine's spine stiffened. "What makes you think?" "Madam, with respect, you've got the look of someone who's seen the devil himself, and those bruises didn't come from a fall." He met her gaze steadily across the fire. "I'm offering help, nothing more. No strings attached." The sincerity in his eyes was almost too much to bear. Katherine looked away, focusing on Rose's tiny features as she nursed. "His name is Preston Blackburn," she said after a long pause, her voice barely audible over the fire's crackle. "He owns the Golden Creek Ranch about 20 miles south of here." "Blackburn," Kieran repeated, his expression darkening. "I've heard tales, none of them good." "The tales don't tell the half of it." Katherine's voice was hollow. "I was his housekeeper. After his wife died last year, he changed. Or maybe he was always that way beneath the surface." Kieran waited, not pushing but making it clear he was willing to listen. "Rose isn't his," she continued, stroking the baby's downy hair. "She's my sister's child. Emily died in childbirth 7 months ago, and I promised to raise Rose as my own." Her voice caught. "Preston found out I was sending letters to my cousin in Helena, planning to leave. He locked us in the root cellar. Said if I wouldn't be his wife willingly, he'd break me until I agreed." She fell silent, the horror of those 3 days in darkness hanging unspoken between them. "How did you escape?" Kieran asked gently. "The cook, Maria. She's been there for 20 years. She slipped me the key when she brought food, gave me her shawl for Rose." Katherine's eyes filled with tears. "She'll pay for it if Preston finds out. He's not a forgiving man." "Men like that rarely are," Kieran said grimly. "But you got away. That's what matters now." Katherine nodded, wiping away tears with the back of her hand. "I took what food I could carry and ran through the night. I've been avoiding the roads, keeping to the hills. But he'll be searching. He has men all through these parts." "Then it's settled," Kieran said, his tone brooking no argument. "I'll escort you to Helena. Blackburn's men might think twice about bothering a woman traveling with a man." "I can't ask you to risk yourself like that." "You didn't ask, I offered." He stood up, stretching his tall frame. "Get some rest, Miss Everett. I'll take first watch, please. Call me Katherine." A small smile touched his lips. "Katherine, then." He tipped his hat and moved to sit on a boulder overlooking their camp, his rifle across his knees. Katherine settled Rose beside her on the bedroll, cradling the now sleeping infant close. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to close her eyes without fear. Whether it was exhaustion or the unexpected feeling of safety Kieran provided, sleep claimed her almost instantly. She dreamed of running, always running, with Preston's laughter echoing behind her. But this time, there was someone else in the dream, a tall figure with storm-gray eyes who stood between her and the darkness, offering a hand that promised safety. The sound of a twig snapping jolted Katherine awake. Her eyes flew open to find the sky lightening with dawn. Rose still slumbered peacefully beside her, and Kieran was crouched by the fire, coaxing it back to life. His head was turned toward the ridge above them, his body tense with alertness. "What is it?" Katherine whispered, already reaching for Rose. Kieran held up a hand, signaling for quiet. He rose to his feet in one fluid motion, rifle ready. "Probably just a deer," he said, but his tone belied his words. Katherine gathered Rose into her arms, her heart pounding. The baby stirred but didn't wake, her tiny face peaceful in the gray light of dawn. Long minutes passed as Kieran scanned the ridgeline. Finally, his shoulders relaxed slightly. Whatever it was, it's gone now. He returned to the fire, but Katherine noticed he kept his rifle within easy reach. "How'd you sleep?" "Better than I have in months," she admitted, surprised to find it was true. "Good. You needed it." He poured coffee into a tin cup and offered it to her. "It's not fancy, but it's hot." Katherine shifted Rose to one arm and accepted the cup with her free hand. The bitter liquid warmed her from the inside out, a small comfort against the morning chill. "We should move soon," Kieran said, studying the sky. "Storm's coming in from the west. I'd like to make it to Widow's Creek by nightfall." "How far is that?" "About 15 miles. There's a trading post there. We can get supplies, maybe rent a wagon, make the journey easier on you and the little one." Katherine's brow furrowed. "I don't have much money." "Don't worry about that now." Kieran began packing up their small camp. "I've got a bit saved, enough to get us to Helena." "I can't accept. You can pay me back once you're settled," he interrupted, his tone kind but firm. "Pride's a luxury neither of us can afford right now, Katherine." She wanted to argue but knew he was right. Rose's safety had to come before her pride. "Thank you," she said instead, and was rewarded with a warm smile that transformed his weathered face. They broke camp quickly, erasing all signs of their presence. Kieran insisted Katherine ride his horse, Silver, while he walked alongside. Rose was secured to Katherine's front with the shawl, leaving her hands free to hold the reins. "You ride well," Kieran observed as they made their way across a rolling meadow. "My father raised horses before he died," Katherine explained. "I practically grew up in the saddle." "Where was that?" "Missouri, near Springfield." A shadow crossed her face. "We lost everything in the war. My mother died of typhoid in '67. After that, it was just me and Emily." "I'm sorry," Kieran said simply. "War takes more than just the men who fight in it." Katherine studied him with new interest. "You fought," he nodded, his eyes on the horizon. "Union cavalry. Enlisted in '63, right after I got off the boat from Ireland. Seemed like the thing to do at the time." "You were young." A smile touched his lips. 18 and full of dreams about the promised land. Found out quick enough that America had troubles of its own. Yet you stayed. Nowhere else to go, he shrugged. And I grew fond of the West. There's a freedom here you can't find in the old country. They traveled steadily throughout the morning, Kieran leading them through ravines and stands of pine that kept them hidden from any eyes that might be watching the main trails. The storm he'd predicted began to gather force, dark clouds piling up against the western mountains. Around midday, they stopped in a protected hollow to rest and eat. Rose was awake and fussy, demanding Katherine's full attention. Kieran gave them privacy, scouting the ridge above while Katherine nursed and changed the baby. When he returned, Katherine was singing softly to Rose, a lullaby about mockingbirds and diamond rings. The tenderness in her voice made Kieran pause, struck by the tableau of mother and child in the dappled sunlight filtering through the pines. "That's pretty," he said, settling beside them. "My mother used to sing something similar." Katherine smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "It's one of the few things I remember clearly about my own mother. She sang it to me, and I sang it to Emily and now to Rose." Her smile faded. "Sometimes I worry she'll forget Emily entirely." "You'll keep her memory alive," Kieran said with conviction. "Through stories and songs. That's how we carry on those we've lost." Katherine nodded, touched by his understanding. "Do you have family waiting somewhere?" "Not anymore." He pulled out his knife and began whittling a small piece of wood. "Lost my parents to the fever in Boston back in '65. My older brother Michael died at Gettysburg." "I'm sorry," Katherine said, echoing his earlier sympathy. Kieran shrugged, his focus on the wood in his hands. "It was a long time ago." "And no wife, no children?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, and Katherine felt her cheeks warm. "I'm sorry, that's not my business. No need to apologize." His hands continued their deft movements, shaping the wood with practiced ease. "Never found the right woman, I suppose. Or maybe I wasn't looking hard enough." He glanced up, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "Though my friend Daniel tells me it's because I'm too ornery for any sensible woman to put up with." Katherine laughed, the sound surprising them both. "I find that hard to believe, Mr. O'Malley." "Kieran," he corrected gently. "And you haven't seen me when I've been riding for 3 days straight in the rain." Their eyes met across the small space between them, and something shifted in the air, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. Katherine looked away first, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance and the days of grime on her skin. "We should keep moving," she said, securing Rose back into the shawl. Kieran nodded, pocketing his carving. "The storm's moving faster than I thought. We'll need to find shelter soon." They continued their journey as the sky darkened ominously overhead. The wind picked up, bending the tops of the pines and carrying the scent of rain. Rose grew increasingly agitated, sensing the tension in the air. "There's an old line shack about 2 miles ahead," Kieran said, raising his voice against the rising wind. "Used to belong to the Circle M Ranch before they sold out. It's not much, but it'll keep us dry." The first heavy drops began to fall as they sighted the shack, a weathered structure nestled against a hillside. By the time they reached it, the rain was coming down in sheets, turning the ground to mud beneath their feet. Kieran helped Katherine dismount, then led Silver to a lean-to attached to the side of the shack. Katherine hurried inside with Rose, finding the interior dim but mercifully dry. A small iron stove stood in one corner, and rough-hewn furniture, a table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bed frame with a sagging rope base filled the single room. "Home sweet home," Kieran said as he entered, water streaming from his hat and coat. "At least until the storm passes." Katherine bounced Rose gently, trying to soothe her cries. "It's perfect. Thank you." Kieran busied himself with starting a fire in the stove, using the dry kindling stacked beside it. Soon, warmth began to fill the small space, and the rhythmic drumming of rain on the roof created a cocoon of sound around them. As the afternoon wore into evening, they settled into a companionable routine. Kieran prepared a simple meal from their provisions, supplemented by a rabbit he'd managed to shoot earlier that day. Katherine tended to Rose, finally getting the overtired infant to sleep in a makeshift cradle fashioned from Kieran's spare shirt and a wooden crate. "She's a good baby," Kieran observed as they sat at the table, sharing the rabbit stew. "Strong like her mother." "Aunt," Katherine corrected, though the word felt strange on her tongue. "Though I suppose I am her mother now in all the ways that matter." "Blood isn't the only thing that makes family," Kieran agreed. "Sometimes it's the people who choose to stand by you when they don't have to." Katherine studied him across the table, wondering at the story behind his words. "Like you're doing for us." A hint of color touched his cheekbones. "It's nothing more than common decency. We both know that's rare enough these days." Outside, the storm intensified, wind howling around the corners of the shack and rattling the single window. Katherine shivered despite the warmth of the stove. "Are you cold?" Kieran asked, noticing her discomfort. "No, just—" She hesitated. "Do you think they're still looking for us?" Kieran considered the question, not offering false reassurance. "Probably. Men like Blackburn don't give up easily when they think something belongs to them." His expression hardened. "But they won't find us tonight, not in this weather. And tomorrow we'll be that much closer to Helena." Katherine nodded, taking comfort in his practical approach. "What will you do after you've seen us safely there?" "Haven't thought that far ahead." He leaned back in his chair. "I've got some business in Bozeman. After that, maybe head up to the Yellowstone country. There's work for a man who knows horses. You don't have a home, not the kind with 4 walls and a deed." His smile was wistful. "Home's always been wherever I hang my hat." "That sounds lonely." "Sometimes," he admitted, "but there's a freedom in it too." Katherine understood that yearning for freedom all too well. She'd thought she'd found it when she'd left Missouri, only to end up in another kind of cage at Golden Creek Ranch. "What about you?" Kieran asked. "What will you do in Helena?" "My cousin Abigail runs a boarding house there. She's offered me work and a place to stay until I can get on my feet." Katherine traced the grain of the wooden table with her fingertip. "I want to save enough to buy a small place of my own someday. Somewhere Rose can grow up safe, with room to run and trees to climb." "That's a good dream," Kieran said softly. "Worth fighting for." Their eyes met across the table, and this time neither looked away. In the golden light of the lantern, Katherine saw something in Kieran's gaze that made her heart beat faster, a warmth, a kindness, but also a spark of something more. Something that hadn't been awakened in her for a very long time. The moment was broken by a particularly violent gust of wind that sent a shower of sparks up the stovepipe. Kieran stood, moving to check that the stove was secure. "Storm's getting worse. We should try to get some sleep. Tomorrow may be a long day." The sleeping arrangements were simple but awkward. Kieran insisted Katherine take the bed with Rose, while he would sleep on his bedroll near the stove. Katherine was too exhausted to argue, gratefully sinking onto the lumpy mattress with Rose nestled against her side. Despite her fatigue, sleep eluded her. Every crack of thunder, every whistle of wind through the shack's imperfect seams, sent her heart racing with fear that it might be Preston or his men. She lay awake, listening to Kieran's even breathing from across the room, finding unexpected comfort in his presence. Sometime in the deepest part of the night, when the storm had begun to abate, Katherine heard Kieran stir. Through half-closed eyes, she watched as he rose silently and moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. His profile was etched in silver by a flash of lightning-strong jaw, straight nose, the curve of his mouth set in a determined line. For the first time since she'd fled Golden Creek Ranch, Katherine allowed herself to think beyond mere survival. What would it be like to have a man like Kieran O'Malley in her life? A man who offered help without demanding anything in return, who respected her decisions even when he disagreed with them. Such thoughts were dangerous, she knew. She had Rose to think about, a new life to build. There was no room for romantic notions about a wandering cowboy, no matter how kind his eyes or gentle his hands. Katherine closed her eyes, willing herself to sleep. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. For now they were safe, and that had to be enough. Dawn broke clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. Katherine awoke to find Kieran already up, stoking the fire in the stove and heating water for coffee. Rose gurgled happily on her makeshift bed, tiny fists waving in the air. "Morning," Kieran said, tipping his hat to her. "Sleep well." Eventually, Katherine admitted, sitting up and running a hand through her tangled hair. She felt self-conscious suddenly, aware of her rumpled clothes and unwashed face. "Is there enough water for me to wash up a bit?" "Of course." Kieran gestured to a basin he'd already prepared. "I'll step outside, give you some privacy." Katherine washed quickly, using the precious water to clean herself and Rose as best she could. She changed the baby's cloth diaper, thankful that she'd managed to grab a supply before fleeing the ranch. Rose seemed in good spirits, cooing and smiling as Katherine sang softly to her. When Kieran returned, Katherine was feeding Rose while seated on the edge of the bed. He kept his eyes averted, busying himself with preparing breakfast. The morning light streamed through the window, illuminating the small shack and casting long shadows across the floor. "The trail should be passable after the rain," he said, handing her a cup of coffee. "We'll make better time today." "How far to Widow's Creek now?" "About 10 miles, maybe less if we push. We'll be there by mid-afternoon." Katherine nodded, shifting Rose to her shoulder to burp her. "Kieran, I've been thinking. Once we reach the trading post, perhaps it would be better if we went our separate ways." He turned to face her, surprise evident in his expression. "Why's that? You've already done more than enough. And if Preston's men are looking for me, they'll be watching for a woman alone with a baby. They might not notice me in a busy trading post if I'm careful." Kieran crossed his arms, leaning against the table. "And how will you get to Helena? It's still a good 80 miles from Widow's Creek." "I'll find a way." Katherine lifted her chin. "Perhaps I can join a wagon train or hire a guide." With what money? Her silence was answer enough. "Katherine," Kieran said gently, "I gave my word I'd see you safely to your cousins. I'm not in the habit of breaking promises. I don't want you risking your life because of me. Preston is dangerous. So am I when I need to be." The quiet certainty in his voice sent a shiver down Katherine's spine. "Besides, we don't even know if Blackburn's men are still looking for you. It's been 4 days since you escaped. He might have given up." Katherine shook her head. "You don't know him. He never gives up when he thinks something belongs to him." She looked down at Rose, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder. "He told me once that no one takes what's his. No one." Kieran's expression hardened. "You don't belong to him, neither does Rose. Try telling him that." "I'd be happy to," Kieran muttered, a dangerous edge to his voice. Katherine studied him, seeing beyond the gentle exterior to the steel beneath. This was a man who had fought in war, who had survived the wild country on his own. Perhaps he was more than capable of standing against Preston Blackburn, but was it fair to ask him to? "Let's get to Widow's Creek," Kieran said, breaking into her thoughts. "We can decide our next move there." They packed up quickly, erasing all signs of their presence from the shack. The morning air was crisp and clean after the storm, the sky a brilliant blue overhead. Katherine felt her spirits lift despite her concerns. Each mile put more distance between them and Preston, bringing them closer to safety. They rode double on Silver now, Kieran insisting it would be faster. Katherine sat behind him, one arm wrapped around his waist for balance while the other secured Rose in the shawl against her chest. The closeness was both comforting and unsettling, the solid warmth of him a constant reminder of his protection. The landscape changed as they traveled, the dense pine forests giving way to more open country rolling hills, dotted with sagebrush and occasional stands of aspen. They kept to the less traveled paths, avoiding the main trails where they might be spotted. Around midday, they stopped to rest in a sheltered hollow beside a small spring. Rose was awake and fussy, demanding Katherine's full attention. Kieran gave them privacy, climbing a nearby rise to survey the land ahead. When he returned, his expression was grim. "Riders," he said without preamble. "About 2 miles back, following our trail." Katherine's blood ran cold. "Preston's men, can't be sure, but they're moving like they're tracking something or someone." "How many?" "4, maybe 5. Kieran knelt beside her, his voice low and urgent. "We need to move now and fast. There's a ravine about a mile ahead that leads down to Broken Arrow Creek. If we can reach it, we can follow the water to throw off our trail." Katherine nodded, her throat tight with fear as she secured Rose back in the shawl. "Let's go." They mounted Silver quickly, Kieran pushing the mare harder than before. Katherine clung to him, her heart pounding in her ears. Rose, sensing her mother's distress, began to whimper. "Shh, little one," Katherine whispered. "We'll be all right." But the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. The ravine appeared ahead, a jagged cut in the earth lined with stunted pine and tumbled boulders. Kieran guided Silver down the steep slope, the horse picking her way carefully among the rocks. At the bottom, a shallow creek gurgled over smooth stones. "We'll follow the water downstream," Kieran said over his shoulder. "It'll hide our tracks." They splashed along the creek bed, the water rarely more than fetlock deep on Silver. The ravine walls rose high on either side, offering protection from watching eyes but also limiting their escape routes. Katherine found herself constantly looking behind them, expecting to see Preston's men appear at any moment. For nearly an hour they followed the winding creek, the only sounds the splash of Silver's hooves in the water and Rose's occasional whimpers. Then the ravine began to widen, the walls gradually sloping down until they emerged into a broad valley. A plume of smoke rose in the distant Widow's Creek trading post. "We made it," Katherine breathed. "Not yet," Kieran cautioned. "We need to be careful. If Blackburn's men are looking for you, they might have someone watching the trading post." They approached cautiously, keeping to the tree line that bordered the valley. The trading post was a collection of sturdy log buildings situated at the crossing of 2 well-traveled trails. A few wagons were gathered in the yard and horses stood hitched to a rail outside the main building. People moved about, traders, trappers, a few women in calico dresses. "Looks busy," Kieran observed. "That's good for us. Easier to blend in." They left Silver hidden in a stand of aspens and approached on foot, Katherine keeping her head down and Rose hidden beneath her shawl. Kieran walked slightly ahead, his posture relaxed but his eyes constantly scanning for danger. The trading post's main building was a large log structure with a wide porch across the front. Inside, the air was thick with the smells of tobacco, leather, and coffee. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything from tools to fabric to canned goods. A pot-bellied stove dominated the center of the room, surrounded by chairs where several men sat smoking and talking. Kieran led Katherine to the counter, where a heavy-set man with a bushy beard was measuring flour for a customer. They waited until he was finished, then Kieran stepped forward. "Afternoon," he said pleasantly. "We're looking for a place to stay the night. Heard you might have rooms to let." The man, presumably the proprietor, looked them over with shrewd eyes. "Might do. Got a small cabin out back, usually rent it to families passing through. $2 a night includes supper and breakfast." "That'll suit us fine," Kieran said, counting out the money. The man pocketed the coins. "Name's George Wilcox. You folks just passing through, on our way to Helena," Kieran replied, keeping his tone casual. "My wife's got family there." Katherine felt a jolt at the word wife, but kept her expression neutral, playing along with the necessary deception. Wilcox nodded. "Road's been busy lately. Had a group of men through here just yesterday, asking after a woman and baby." His eyes flickered to Katherine, then back to Kieran. "Seemed mighty interested in finding her." Katherine felt her heart skip a beat. Beside her, Kieran's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, his hand moving closer to his holstered pistol. "That's so," Kieran's voice remained even. "What did you tell them?" Wilcox shrugged. "Told them what I tell everyone asking questions, that I mind my own business and suggest they do the same." He leaned forward slightly. "Don't much care for men who hunt women, if you take my meaning." Some of the tension left Kieran's shoulders. "Appreciate that, Mr. Wilcox." "Cabin's round back," Wilcox said, handing over a key. "Your horse can go in the stable. Supper's at 6 in the main house." "Much obliged." Kieran turned to Katherine. "Shall we, dear?" She nodded, following his lead as they exited the store. Only when they were outside, away from curious ears, did she speak. "They were here," she whispered, fear evident in her voice despite her efforts to control it. "Yesterday," Kieran reminded her. "They've moved on, probably heading north, thinking you'd take the most direct route to Helena." "What if they come back? Then we'll deal with it." His voice was calm, steadying. "For now, let's get settled and figure out our next move." The cabin was small but clean, with a bed, table, 2 chairs, and a small fireplace. Katherine sat on the edge of the bed, cradling Rose while Kieran brought in their few belongings and then went to stable Silver. When he returned, Katherine had composed herself somewhat, though her eyes still held the shadow of fear. "We need supplies," she said practically. "And I should wash our clothes while we have the chance." "I'll get what we need from the store," Kieran offered. "Make a list, and here," he handed her a small pouch that clinked with coins. "Get whatever you and Rose need." Katherine stared at the pouch. "Kieran, I can't take your money." "It's not a gift, it's a loan." His eyes held hers steadily. "Like I said before, you can pay me back when you're settled." She wanted to refuse, to maintain what little independence she had left, but Rose needed clean diapers and they both needed food for the journey ahead. Pride, as Kieran had pointed out earlier, was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Thank you," she said softly, accepting the pouch. "I'll repay every cent, I promise." A smile touched his lips. "I know you will." They spent the afternoon preparing for the next leg of their journey. Kieran purchased supplies while Katherine washed their clothes in a tub behind the cabin, grateful for the simple task that kept her hands busy and her mind occupied. Rose napped on a blanket in the shade, occasionally waking to coo and kick her tiny feet in the air. By evening, they had everything ready for an early departure the next morning. They ate supper in the main house with Wilcox and his wife, a cheerful woman named Martha who fussed over Rose and pressed extra biscuits on Katherine, declaring her too thin by half. As they walked back to their cabin under a sky ablaze with stars, Katherine felt a strange sense of peace despite the danger that still lurked. Perhaps it was the simple comfort of a full belly and clean clothes, or perhaps it was the steady presence of the man beside her. "Thank you," she said as they reached the cabin door, "for everything." Kieran looked down at her, his expression softened by the moonlight. "You don't need to keep thanking me, Katherine." "I do, though. You've risked so much for us. Some things are worth risking everything for." His voice was low, intimate in the darkness. Katherine felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the summer night. For a moment, she thought he might lean down, might bridge the small distance between them. Part of her, a part she'd thought long dormant, hoped he would. But Kieran stepped back, clearing his throat. "We should get some rest. Dawn comes early." Inside the cabin, they prepared for bed in a silence charged with unspoken things. Kieran made a pallet for himself on the floor near the door while Katherine took the bed with Rose. "Good night, Katherine," he said as he blew out the lamp. "Good night," she whispered into the darkness, wondering if he too was lying awake, thinking of what might have been. They left Widow's Creek before first light, slipping away quietly while the trading post still slumbered. Kieran had decided against purchasing a wagon, reasoning that horseback would allow them to move faster and take less traveled routes. Instead, he'd bought a second horse, a sturdy bay gelding, so they could each ride separately, making better time. Katherine rode with Rose secured in front of her, the baby contentedly watching the world go by from her perch. The road to Helena wound through varied terrain, rolling grasslands, pine-covered hills, and occasionally steep mountain passes. They kept a steady pace, stopping frequently to rest and care for Rose. For 3 days, they traveled without incident. The fear that had been Katherine's constant companion since her escape began to ease slightly, replaced by a growing comfort with the rhythm of the journey and the man who rode beside her. They fell into an easy partnership, Kieran handling the horses and making camp, while Katherine cared for Rose and prepared their simple meals. In the evenings, as they sat by the fire, they talked tentatively at first, then with increasing openness as trust grew between them. Kieran told her of his childhood in Ireland, of the potato famine that had driven his family to America, of his years in the cavalry and his wanderings after the war. Katherine shared stories of her life in Missouri, of her sister Emily, and of her dreams for Rose's future. On the 4th day, as they made camp in a sheltered hollow, Katherine noticed Kieran was quieter than usual, his gaze frequently turning northward toward the distant smudge on the horizon that was Helena. "We should reach your cousins by tomorrow afternoon," he said as they ate their evening meal. "Weather holds, that is." Katherine nodded, feeling a strange reluctance at the thought. "Yes, I suppose so." Silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and Rose's soft breathing as she slept nearby. "What will you do after?" Katherine asked finally. "Will you still go to Bozeman?" Kieran poked at the fire with a stick. "I reckon so. Got a friend there who's starting a horse ranch. Said he could use my help breaking the wild ones." "That sounds dangerous." A smile touched his lips. "No more than escorting fugitive women and their babies across Montana territory." Katherine laughed softly, then grew serious. "I can never repay you for what you've done, Kieran. I'm not looking to be repaid." He met her eyes across the fire. "Knowing you and Rose are safe, that's payment enough." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tighten with emotion. "Still, if you ever find yourself in Helena, I'll be sure to call on you," he finished, his expression warm. Katherine wanted to say more, wanted to ask if he might consider staying, wanted to tell him how in just a few short days he'd come to mean more to her than she'd thought possible. But the words stuck in her throat, held back by fear and uncertainty. They retired early that night, both aware that tomorrow would bring the end of their journey together. Katherine lay awake long after Kieran's breathing had evened into sleep, her mind filled with conflicting thoughts and emotions. Dawn was just breaking when Katherine was jolted awake by Kieran's hand over her mouth. "Riders coming," he whispered, his face grim in the gray light. "At least 3 moving fast." Fear shot through her like ice water. "Preston's men. Can't tell yet, but we need to move. Now." They packed up camp with frantic efficiency, Katherine bundling a still sleepy Rose while Kieran saddled the horses. Within minutes, they were mounted and moving, following a game trail that wound up through the hills away from the main road. "Will this take us to Helena?" Katherine asked, keeping her voice low despite the distance they'd put between themselves and the approaching riders. "Eventually. It's a longer route, but less exposed." Kieran's eyes constantly scanned the terrain around them. If it is Blackburn's men, they might have split up to cover more ground. They rode hard for nearly an hour, the horses laboring up steep inclines and picking their way carefully down the other sides. Rose, disturbed by the jolting pace, began to cry, her wails seeming impossibly loud in the quiet morning. "We need to stop," Katherine said desperately. "Just for a few minutes. She needs to be fed and changed." Kieran hesitated, then nodded. "There's a stand of trees ahead. We'll stop there, but only briefly." The small grove provided some shelter, and Katherine quickly dismounted to tend to Rose. Kieran led both horses deeper into the trees, then climbed a tall pine to scout the area they'd just traversed. When he came down, his expression was tight with concern. "They're following our trail, 3 men, well armed." Katherine's hands trembled as she finished securing Rose back in her shawl. "How did they find us?" Might have been watching the trading post after all, or they could have picked up our trail by chance. Kieran helped her mount the bay gelding. "Either way, we need to stay ahead of them." They set off again, pushing the horses as hard as they dared on the rough terrain. The trail wound through increasingly rugged country, forcing them to slow in places where a misstep could mean disaster. Around midday, they emerged from a narrow pass to find themselves looking down on a broad valley. In the distance, the buildings of Helena were visible, smoke rising from chimneys into the clear blue sky. "We made it," Katherine breathed, hope surging within her. "Not yet," Kieran cautioned, his eyes on the back trail. "We've still got a good 5 miles of open country to cross." As if to emphasize his point, a shout echoed from behind them, followed by the distant crack of a rifle. The bullet went wide, but the message was clear. Their pursuers had spotted them. "Ride hard for town," Kieran ordered, drawing his revolver. "Don't stop for anything." "What about you?" Katherine asked, fear clutching at her heart. "I'll be right behind you, now go." Katherine dug her heels into the bay's sides, urging the tired horse down the slope toward Helena. Behind her, she heard Kieran fire 2 shots, then the thunder of his horse's hooves as he followed. The open valley offered no cover, nowhere to hide. Katherine bent low over the bay's neck, one arm wrapped protectively around Rose as they galloped across the grassland. More shots rang out behind them, but none found their mark. Glancing back, she saw Kieran just a few lengths behind, his face set in grim determination. Beyond him, 3 riders were in pursuit, closing the distance steadily on fresher mounts. The outskirts of Helena drew nearer scattered cabins and small farms, giving way to more densely packed buildings. Katherine could see people now, turning to watch the drama unfolding on the plain. A bullet whizzed past her ear, so close she felt the disturbance in the air. The bay gelding stumbled slightly but recovered, its breathing labored from the hard run. Then suddenly Kieran was beside her, reaching across to grasp her reins. "Follow me," he shouted above the wind and hoof beats. He veered toward a side street, leading them into the town at a breakneck pace. They clattered down Helena's main street, scattering pedestrians and wagons. Kieran led them in a zigzag pattern through the town, taking sharp turns and doubling back until Katherine was thoroughly disoriented. Finally, they pulled up in front of a large, two-story house with a wide porch. A sign hanging from the eaves read Everett Boarding House. "Your cousin's place?" Kieran asked, dismounting quickly and helping Katherine down. She nodded, clutching Rose tightly to her chest. The baby, miraculously, had fallen asleep during their wild ride. Kieran glanced back the way they'd come. "I don't think they saw where we turned, but they'll keep looking." The front door of the boarding house opened, and a woman with copper hair pulled back in a severe bun stepped onto the porch. "Katherine," she called, her voice thick with disbelief. "Katherine, is that you, Abigail?" Katherine rushed up the steps into her cousin's embrace, tears of relief streaming down her face. Abigail Everett pulled back to look at her, then at the baby in her arms. "And this must be little Rose." "Oh, my dear, your letter said you were coming, but I had no idea." "Abigail, we need to get inside," Katherine interrupted urgently. "There are men after us, dangerous men." Abigail's expression hardened. She turned to Kieran, who still stood at the bottom of the steps, his hand resting on his holstered revolver. "And you are Kieran O'Malley, madam. I've been escorting your cousin from Golden Creek Ranch." "Well, Mr. O'Malley, don't just stand there. Bring those horses round to the stable and then get yourself inside. Quickly now." Kieran nodded, leading the exhausted animals toward a small stable behind the boarding house. Katherine followed Abigail inside, finding herself in a comfortable parlor furnished with well-worn but clean chairs and settees. "Now," Abigail said, settling Katherine on a sofa, "you'll tell me everything. But first, let's get you and this little one something to eat and drink." By the time Kieran joined them, Katherine had given Abigail a brief account of her escape from Preston Blackburn and their journey to Helena. Abigail's face had grown increasingly grave as she listened. "This Blackburn," she said as Kieran entered the room. "He's the owner of Golden Creek Ranch." Kieran nodded. "And he's got connections all through this territory. His men won't give up easily." Abigail snorted. "Well, he's not the only one with connections. My late husband was the mayor of Helena for 12 years. I know every lawman and judge in this county." She rose to her feet, a formidable figure despite her small stature. "Mr. O'Malley, would you be so kind as to fetch Sheriff Donovan? His office is just down the street past the Mercantile. Tell him Abigail Everett needs him urgently." Kieran looked to Katherine, who nodded reassuringly. "Go. We'll be safe here with Abigail." Once he had left, Abigail turned to Katherine with a shrewd look. "That's a good man you found. Not many would risk themselves for a woman they barely know." Katherine felt her cheeks warm. "He's been extraordinary." "And handsome, too," Abigail observed with a raised eyebrow. "The way he looks at you, well, I'd say he's not just being chivalrous." "Abigail, please. He's simply a kind man who came to our aid when we needed it most." "If you say so, dear." Abigail's tone was skeptical. "Now, let's get you and Rose settled. You'll stay here, of course. I've got a room at the back of the house that would be perfect away from the street and with its own little sitting area. You can work in the kitchen when you're ready, but there's no rush." Katherine felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. "Thank you, Abigail. I don't know what we would have done without you." "Family takes care of family," Abigail said simply. "Now, let me hold this little angel while you go wash up. You look like you've ridden through half of Montana, which I suppose you have." Katherine handed Rose to Abigail and went to the washroom off the kitchen. As she cleaned away the dust of the trail, she found herself thinking of Kieran, of his courage, his kindness, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. Would he really leave for Bozeman now that they'd reached Helena safely? The thought left an emptiness in her chest that surprised her with its intensity. When she returned to the parlor, freshly washed and wearing a clean dress borrowed from Abigail. She found Kieran had returned with Sheriff Donovan, a tall, weathered man with a silver star pinned to his vest. "Miss Everett," the sheriff greeted her, rising to his feet. "Mr. O'Malley here has been telling me about your situation. I want you to know that as long as you're in Helena, you're under my protection." Relief flooded through Katherine. "Thank you, Sheriff. But Preston Blackburn is a powerful man. So I've heard." Donovan's expression was grim. "But he has no jurisdiction here and no legal claim on you or the child. If his men show their faces in my town, they'll answer to me and my deputies." As if on cue, a commotion erupted outside, shouting voices and the clatter of horses. Kieran moved to the window, peering cautiously through the curtains. "It's them," he said tersely. "3 riders, just like I thought." Sheriff Donovan straightened his vest. "Well now, let's go have a word with these gentlemen." He turned to Katherine. "You stay inside, Miss Everett. Mr. O'Malley, you're welcome to join me if you've a mind to." Kieran nodded, checking his revolver before following the sheriff to the door. Katherine moved to the window, her heart pounding as she watched the scene unfold on the street outside. The 3 men had dismounted and were standing in front of the boarding house. Katherine recognized them immediately: Frank Dawson, Preston's foreman, and 2 of his ranch hands, Hank and Lester. All 3 were armed, their expressions hard and determined. Sheriff Donovan stepped onto the porch, Kieran slightly behind him. "Afternoon, gentlemen. Something I can help you with." Frank Dawson stepped forward, his hand resting near his holstered pistol. "We're looking for a woman and her baby." "Seen them pass this way?" "Might have," Donovan replied casually. "Depends on why you're asking." "That's none of your business, Sheriff," Dawson said, his voice edged with contempt. "We're just here to collect Mr. Blackburn's property and be on our way." Katherine saw Kieran's posture stiffen at the word property, but he remained silent, letting the sheriff handle the situation. "Well now, that's where you're wrong," Donovan said, his tone hardening. "Everything that happens in Helena is my business. And there are no women or children in this town who are anyone's property." "The woman stole from Mr. Blackburn," Dawson insisted. "Valuable items. He just wants what's his returned." "Is that so?" Donovan's voice was skeptical. "Well, if Mr. Blackburn wants to file a formal complaint, he's welcome to come to my office and do so. In the meantime, I suggest you boys turn around and head back to Golden Creek." Dawson's face darkened with anger. "We ain't leaving without the woman and the kid." "Yes, you are." Donovan's hand moved to rest on his own pistol. "Unless you'd prefer accommodations in my jail, your choice." For a tense moment, Katherine thought Dawson might draw his weapon. But then he seemed to think better of it, taking in the determined stance of the sheriff and the dangerous stillness of Kieran beside him. "This ain't over," Dawson spat. "Mr. Blackburn won't stand for this. Like I said, he's welcome to come see me himself." Donovan's voice was implacable. "Now move along before I decide you're disturbing the peace." With a final venomous glare, Dawson and his men mounted their horses and rode away. Katherine released the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, sagging against the window frame in relief. Abigail, who had been watching from beside her with Rose in her arms, patted her shoulder. "See, I told you Sheriff Donovan would handle it." When Kieran and the sheriff returned inside, Katherine rushed to them. "Thank you, Sheriff. I can't tell you what this means to us." Donovan waved away her thanks. "Just doing my job, Miss Everett, but you should know men like Blackburn don't give up easily. They might be gone for now, but they'll be back." "What can we do?" Katherine asked, fear creeping back into her voice. "For now, stay close to the boarding house. I'll have a deputy keep an eye on the place." Donovan turned to Abigail. "And I'll send word to Judge Wilson. Might be able to get some kind of legal protection ordered. After the sheriff had left, promising to return in the morning, an awkward silence fell over the parlor. Kieran stood near the door, his hat in his hands, looking as if he wasn't sure of his place now that they'd reached safety. "Mr. O'Malley," Abigail said briskly, "you'll stay for supper, of course, and I insist you take a room here tonight. It's the least we can do after all you've done for Katherine and Rose." Kieran glanced at Katherine, a question in his eyes. She nodded, hoping he could read the plea in her expression. "Don't go. Not yet." "That's very kind, Mrs. Everett," he said. "I'd be grateful for a proper meal and a real bed." "Excellent. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check on dinner preparations. Katherine, why don't you show Mr. O'Malley to the blue room upstairs?" Abigail handed Rose back to Katherine and bustled off to the kitchen, leaving them alone in the parlor. Katherine cradled Rose against her shoulder, suddenly shy in Kieran's presence. The journey had forged an intimacy between them, sleeping under the same stars, sharing meals and stories, facing danger side by side. But here, in the civilized confines of Abigail's boarding house, she wasn't sure how to act or what to say. "You made it," Kieran said softly, breaking the silence. "You're safe now." "Thanks to you," Katherine met his gaze. "I don't know if Rose and I would have survived without your help." A smile touched his lips. "I think you underestimate yourself, Katherine Everett. You're one of the strongest women I've ever met." The compliment warmed her from within. "Still, I'm glad you found us that day. Glad you said those words." "You're done running," he quoted himself, his smile widening. "Seems fitting now." "Yes," she agreed, though privately she wondered if she would ever truly stop looking over her shoulder, ever truly feel safe as long as Preston Blackburn was free to pursue her. As if reading her thoughts, Kieran's expression grew serious. "Blackburn won't give up easily, I know." Katherine shifted Rose to her other shoulder. "But at least here we have friends' protection. It's a start." Kieran nodded, though something in his eyes, a shadow of uncertainty, perhaps made Katherine's heart constrict. Was he already thinking of leaving? Of continuing to Bozeman as he'd planned? "I should show you to your room," she said, pushing the thought aside. "You must be tired after everything that's happened today." The blue room was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the garden behind the boarding house. Kieran set his saddlebags on the floor and hung his hat on a peg by the door. "Thank you," he said simply. Katherine lingered in the doorway, Rose now sleeping peacefully against her. "Dinner should be ready soon. Abigail keeps a good table." Kieran nodded, and again that awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken words and uncertain futures. "Katherine," he began, then hesitated. "I was thinking." A knock at the front door downstairs interrupted whatever he'd been about to say. They both tensed, listening as Abigail's footsteps crossed to answer it. "Probably just one of the other boarders," Katherine said, though she didn't quite believe it. "Probably," Kieran agreed, but his hand moved to rest on his revolver. They heard Abigail's voice, then a man's, not Dawson's rough tones, but a cultured voice that sent ice through Katherine's veins. "Preston," she whispered, the color draining from her face. Kieran moved instantly, stepping in front of Katherine and drawing his revolver. "Is there a back way out of here?" Katherine nodded. "Through the kitchen. There's a door that leads to the garden. Go, now, I'll hold him here." "No." Katherine grabbed his arm. "He's dangerous, Kieran. He'll kill you without a second thought." "Katherine," Abigail's voice called up the stairs, tense but controlled. "There's someone here to see you." Kieran and Katherine exchanged a look, a silent communication born of their days together. "We face him together," Kieran said quietly. "But you stay behind me." Katherine nodded, clutching Rose tighter to her chest. "Together," They descended the stairs to find Preston Blackburn standing in the parlor tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his silver-streaked dark hair neatly combed. He looked every inch the successful rancher, a respected member of society. Only Katherine knew the cruelty that lay behind his polished veneer. "Katherine, my dear." Preston's voice was smooth as honey, but his eyes were cold as he took in her appearance and the baby in her arms. "I've been so worried about you." Kieran stepped forward, positioning himself between Katherine and Preston. "Mr. Blackburn, I presume." Preston's gaze shifted to Kieran, assessing him with practiced ease. "And you are Kieran O'Malley, a friend of Miss Everett's. I see." Preston's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Well, Mr. O'Malley, I appreciate your concern, but this is a private matter between Katherine and myself." "Not anymore, it isn't," Kieran said flatly. Preston's expression hardened slightly. "Katherine works for me. She left without notice, taking items that don't belong to her." "I took nothing but what was mine and Rose's," Katherine said, finding her voice at last. "And I don't work for you anymore, Preston. I never will again." "Now, Katherine," Preston's tone was patronizing, "you're upset, I understand that, but running away isn't the answer. Come back to Golden Creek with me. We can talk this through like civilized people." "The lady's not going anywhere with you," Kieran stated, his hand still resting near his holstered revolver. Preston's eyes narrowed. "This doesn't concern you, Cowboy. I'm making it my concern." The tension in the room was palpable. Abigail, who had been watching from near the doorway, stepped forward. "Mr. Blackburn," she said firmly, "my cousin has made her wishes clear. I think it's time for you to leave." Preston ignored her, his gaze fixed on Katherine. "Is this how you repay my generosity, my kindness, after all I've done for you?" Katherine felt a surge of anger cut through her fear. "Kindness? You call what you did kindness? You locked us in a cellar, Preston. You threatened to take Rose from me." "I was upset," Preston said smoothly. "You were planning to leave without a word, but I've had time to think and I'm willing to forgive your indiscretion." "There's nothing to forgive," Katherine said, her voice stronger now. "I don't belong to you, I never did, and now I'm free of you." Preston's facade of civility slipped, revealing the rage beneath. "You think you can just walk away from me? No one leaves Preston Blackburn. No one." "She just did," Kieran said quietly. "And she has the protection of Sheriff Donovan and the law in Helena." As if on cue, the front door opened and Sheriff Donovan stepped in, his hand resting casually on his pistol. "Everything all right in here, Mrs. Everett?" Abigail smiled grimly. "Sheriff, this is Mr. Blackburn from Golden Creek Ranch. He was just leaving." Preston's face was a mask of barely controlled fury, but he was too smart to make a scene in front of the sheriff. "This isn't over, Katherine," he said softly. "Not by a long shot." "Actually, Mr. Blackburn, it is over," Donovan said, stepping closer. "I've just received a telegram from the federal marshal in Virginia City. Seems they're very interested in speaking with you about some land deals that didn't quite follow the letter of the law. And there's the matter of Maria Vasquez." Preston's face went pale. "What about her?" "She came into the sheriff's office there yesterday. Had quite a story to tell about how Miss Everett here escaped from your ranch. Something about being locked in a cellar. That's unlawful imprisonment, Mr. Blackburn. A serious offense." Katherine felt a surge of gratitude for the brave cook who had risked so much to help them escape. "Is Maria all right?" she asked anxiously. Donovan nodded. "She's fine. Staying with her sister in Virginia City under the marshal's protection." Preston's confident demeanor had crumbled, replaced by a calculating look Katherine knew all too well. He was weighing his options, looking for a way out. "These are baseless accusations," he said stiffly. "Maria Vasquez is a disgruntled employee, nothing more." "Well, That'll be for a judge to decide, Donovan replied easily. In the meantime, I suggest you return to Golden Creek and await the marshal's visit, and stay away from Miss Everett and her child unless you want to add more charges to the list. For a moment, Katherine thought Preston might argue further, but then he straightened his jacket, composing himself with visible effort. Very well. But this isn't the end, Katherine. Remember that. With a final cold glare that encompassed both her and Kieran, Preston turned and left the house, the door closing firmly behind him. The tension in the room dissipated like smoke in a breeze. Katherine sagged against the nearest chair, her legs suddenly weak with relief. Rose, disturbed by the confrontation, began to fuss in her arms. "Is it true?" she asked Sheriff Donovan. "About Maria and the marshal," Donovan nodded, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Every word. Your friend Maria is a brave woman. She rode all the way to Virginia City to report what Blackburn did to you. The marshal there has been building a case against him for years: land fraud, intimidation, maybe worse. Your testimony could help put him away for good." "I'll testify," Katherine said without hesitation. "Whatever it takes." "Good girl." Donovan tipped his hat. "I'll be in touch when the marshal arrives. In the meantime, try not to worry. Blackburn won't risk any more trouble with the law watching him so closely." After the sheriff had left, Abigail insisted they all sit down to the dinner that had been prepared. The boarding house's other residents joined them: a schoolteacher, an elderly couple, and a young lawyer, making for a lively meal that helped distract Katherine from the confrontation with Preston. Throughout the evening, she was acutely aware of Kieran beside her, his quiet strength, his occasional smile when Rose did something amusing, the way his eyes sought hers across the table. But underneath, her relief at Preston's retreat was a growing anxiety about what would happen now. Would Kieran still leave for Bozeman? The thought left a hollow feeling in her chest that no amount of Abigail's good cooking could fill. After dinner, when the other boarders had retired and Abigail had gone to her own quarters, Katherine found herself alone with Kieran on the porch. Rose was asleep in a cradle Abigail had brought down from the attic, leaving Katherine's arms free for the first time in what felt like forever. The night was clear and cool, stars scattered like diamond dust across the black velvet sky. Helena's Main Street was quiet at this late hour, just a few lights still burning in windows here and there. "You think it's really over?" Katherine asked softly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Kieran considered the question, his profile thoughtful in the dim light from the parlor windows. "With the law involved, probably. Men like Blackburn care about their reputation, their standing in society. He won't risk losing everything over one woman, no matter how special she might be." The last words were spoken so quietly that Katherine wasn't sure she'd heard them correctly. She turned to look at Kieran, finding his gaze already on her, warm and intent. "What about Bozeman?" she asked, the question that had been plaguing her finally finding voice. "Your friend's horse ranch." "It'll still be there," Kieran said simply. "Some things are more important." Katherine's heart quickened. "Like what?" Instead of answering, Kieran reached out, his calloused fingers gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. The simple touch sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cool night air. "When I found you and Rose that day," he said, his voice low and earnest, "I told you that you were done running. I meant it, Katherine, but I never expected." He hesitated, searching for words. "I never expected to find something I didn't even know I was looking for." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. "And what was that? A reason to stop running myself?" His hand cupped her cheek, warm and steady. "All these years I've been wandering from place to place, never staying long enough to put down roots. But these past days with you and Rose, They've made me question everything I thought I wanted." "Kieran," Katherine whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I know it's too soon," he continued quickly. "You've been through so much and you need time to heal, to build a life here with Rose. I understand that. But if you'd allow it, I'd like to stay in Helena, to be near you both, to see where this might lead when you're ready." Katherine covered his hand with her own, leaning into his touch. "I'd like that," she said simply. "Very much." The smile that broke across Kieran's face was like sunrise after the longest night. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, a kiss as gentle as it was profound, full of promise and possibility. When they parted, Katherine rested her forehead against his, a sense of peace washing over her that she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't naive enough to believe that all their troubles were over, that the path ahead would be without obstacles. But for the first time in too long, she allowed herself to hope for herself, for Rose, and for the man who had found them when they needed him most. "You're done running," Kieran had told her that day in the wilderness. And finally, Katherine believed it might be true. 1 year later, Katherine stood on the porch of the small house on the outskirts of Helena, watching as Kieran taught Rose to take her first tentative steps across the yard. The little girl, now 18 months old, giggled with delight as she toddled between Kieran's outstretched arms and Katherine's encouraging smile. "That's it, Rosie girl," Kieran encouraged as Rose managed 3 whole steps before tumbling onto her bottom. "You're doing great." Rose laughed, pulling herself back up with the determined expression that was so like her mother's, and tried again. This time she made it all the way to Katherine, who swept her up in a celebratory embrace. "Clever girl," Katherine exclaimed, kissing Rose's chubby cheek. "You're walking." Kieran joined them on the porch, his smile as bright as the autumn sunshine. "She'll be running before we know it," he said, ruffling Rose's copper curls. "Just like her mama." Katherine leaned into his side, savoring the solid warmth of him. "Not running away, I hope." "Never," he promised, dropping a kiss on the top of her head. "This little family has done quite enough running to last a lifetime." And it was true. In the year since they'd arrived in Helena, life had settled into a rhythm of peace and happiness that sometimes still seemed miraculous to Katherine. Preston Blackburn had indeed faced the consequences of his actions, charged with fraud, unlawful imprisonment, and a host of other crimes uncovered by the federal marshal's investigation. His trial had been the talk of the territory, ending with a lengthy prison sentence that ensured he would never threaten Katherine or Rose again. With that shadow lifted, Katherine had been free to build the life she'd dreamed of. She'd worked alongside Abigail at the boarding house until spring, when Kieran had proposed a different arrangement marriage and a small ranch of their own on the outskirts of town. The wedding had been simple but joyful, with Abigail giving Katherine away and Rose serving as an unconventional flower girl in Kieran's arms. Sheriff Donovan had stood as best man, and even Maria had made the journey from Virginia City to witness the union of the woman she'd helped save and the man who'd seen her safely to freedom. Now, as summer gave way to fall, their little ranch was beginning to thrive. Kieran had a way with horses that drew buyers from as far away as Bozeman and Butte, while Katherine had turned the front rooms of their house into a small millinery shop, putting to use the skills she'd learned as a girl in Missouri. "Dinner should be ready soon," Katherine said, shifting Rose to her hip. "I made your favorite stew." Kieran's eyes lit up. "The one with dumplings, the very same." She smiled at his boyish enthusiasm. Some things never changed, and his appreciation for her cooking was one of them. As they turned to go inside, the sound of an approaching wagon made them pause. Kieran's hand went instinctively to his hip, where he still wore his revolver out of habit, but his posture relaxed as he recognized the visitor. "It's just Daniel," he said, waving to the man driving the wagon. "Probably bringing those books he promised to lend us." Daniel Collins, Kieran's friend from Bozeman who had ultimately decided to settle in Helena himself, pulled his wagon to a stop in front of their house. Beside him sat his wife Lucy, holding their infant son. "Afternoon, O'Malley's." Daniel called cheerfully. "Hope we're not interrupting supper." "Not at all," Katherine replied. "There's plenty to go around if you'd like to join us." Lucy's face brightened. "We'd love to if it's not too much trouble, and we've brought news that couldn't wait." Once inside, seated around the table with steaming bowls of stew before them, Daniel shared their news the territory governor had approved funding for a new school in Helena, and Lucy, a former teacher, had been offered the position of headmistress. "That's wonderful," Katherine exclaimed. "Rose will be old enough for school before we know it. And speaking of little ones," Lucy said with a meaningful smile, "we were hoping Rose might like to have a playmate her own age in a few years." It took a moment for her meaning to register. When it did, Katherine gasped with delight. "You're expecting again," Lucy nodded, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Due in the spring. The doctor says everything looks promising this time." After Lucy's previous heartbreaking miscarriage, this news was especially joyful. Congratulations were offered, glasses were raised in toast, and the conversation flowed easily among friends who had become like family. Later, after their guests had departed and Rose had been tucked into bed, Katherine joined Kieran on the porch swing he'd built that summer. The evening air was crisp with the promise of fall, the sky ablaze with stars. "Happy?" Kieran asked, drawing her close against his side. "More than I ever thought possible," Katherine answered truthfully. She placed her hand over his, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Do you ever think about that day, when you found us?" Kieran nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Often. I was tracking a mountain lion that had been killing calves at the Johnson place. Never did find that cat," he grinned. "Found something far more valuable instead." Katherine laughed softly. "A half-starved woman and a crying baby. I'm not sure most men would consider that a fair trade." "Most men are fools, then." Kieran's voice was tender as he turned to face her. "That day changed my life, Katherine, finding you and Rose. It was like finding pieces of myself I never knew were missing." Katherine felt tears well in her eyes, the overwhelming happiness of the past year catching up to her in a rush of emotion. "I love you, Kieran O'Malley." "And I love you, Katherine O'Malley." He leaned forward to kiss her, a kiss that still held all the tenderness of their first, but was now deepened by the bond of shared history and abiding commitment. "You and Rose are my home, my heart, my everything." As they sat together in the growing darkness, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From desperate flight to hard-won peace, from strangers to beloved family. The path had not been easy, but every step, even the most difficult, had led them here. To this life they were building together. She thought of Rose, sleeping peacefully in her little bed, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and protected. She thought of the home they had created, filled with laughter and warmth. And she thought of the future stretching before them, bright with promise and possibility. Kieran had been right that day when he'd found her fleeing through the Montana wilderness, Rose strapped to her back and fear dogging her steps. She was done running. She had found, at last, not just a place to stay but a place to belong. In Kieran's arms, under the vast Montana sky, Katherine Everett O'Malley was finally, truly home.